Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I'm still hearing my mother's voice in the quiet places between breaths, in the echo that lives after the last light goes out and the van door slides shut. It wasn't loud, the warning. It didn't arrive like thunder. It came like a fingertip to the wrist, a pulse check, a soft insistence that said, don't mistake the crowd's warmth for a guarantee of safety. Don't mistake applause for permission. Don't mistake love for ownership. It's strange how a sentence so gentle can weigh more than a shout. It followed me out of a back entrance tonight, past the stacked flight cases and the curtain smell, past the security guard rubbing sleep from his eyes, into a corridor that felt too narrow for all the things I was still carrying. There's a small slice of soul that only exists at 11:47 p.m., where a vending machine blinks at a concrete wall and a single street lamp paints long, tired shadows. The air tastes like the last song lingering in your throat after encore, and your ribs are a cage for a bird that hasn't decided whether it wants to rest or fly. I kept my head down, not because I'm afraid to meet eyes, but because sometimes I'm afraid of what eyes ask me to give. The door clicked open. Cool air slid across the sweat, still cooling at the back of my neck. And then a voice, quick, eager, my name stretched into a request before it even became a greeting. I turned. A guy had that look, the one I know too well. Phone already up, like a tiny stage he could raise with one thumb. Smile, bright, breath fast, and behind it the calculation we all learn in this era. This frame, this proof. This moment captured and traded like currency. I've been through this 1,000 times. Sometimes it's beautiful, a bridge you can walk together. Sometimes it's a toll gate you're expected to pay to pass. I felt that old tug of war between wanting to give and needing to keep, between kindness and cost. My mother's warning flickered again, a small lighthouse in a busy sea. I said I couldn't just then, quietly. I always begin softly. I've learned that tone can be a cushion, that people can fall on it gently and realize it's not rejection, it's just a boundary shaped like a room I need for myself. I said I was late, that my voice needed rest, that there would be other times. I saw the change happen, like weather moving across a face, sunny to storm in a heartbeat. The phone didn't go down. It came closer, the lens like a finger tapping my chest. 2 seconds, he said. You owe it to us. You owe. The word arrived with its own gravity. You learn in this job that gratitude can become a leash when someone wraps it around your neck and calls it love. You learn that some people think support is a contract where they are the landlord and your energy is the rent. He took a step closer. I took one back. The corridor narrowed even more, not in space, but in options. The security guard was at the far end, yawning, not yet reading the scene as anything but a whisper. The guy's voice got louder, not to talk to me, but to talk to the invisible audience he believed was watching. It always becomes a performance when a phone is between two hearts. I held up my hands, not in surrender, just in the small gesture that says I'm not a threat and I don't want this to turn into something it never needed to be. He said it again. You owe, he said, if I really cared, I would stop for him. He said he defended me online for years. He said the least I could do is give him this. My mother's warning wasn't a sentence now. It was a presence, standing beside me, the way she does at family dinners, cutting fruit with the kind of patience that can stitch a life back together. Beware of the moments when a gift turns into a demand, she'd said. Beware of applause that asks to enter your lungs and breathe for you. It happened fast and slow at once. A reach, a tug at my sleeve, the balance in my steps, tipping like a glass too full. The phone knocked my collarbone as he leaned in, the edge of it catching the place where cost lives between skin and soul. We both froze, not because anyone was hurt, but because a line we don't always see had been stepped over. And there's a shock in realizing the ground you stand on was never neutral. I took a breath. The guard was walking now, his radio clearing his throat with a burst of static. The guy's words grew messy, heavy with the kind of anger that feels justified to the person holding it like a torch in a windless room. I didn't raise my voice. I said I needed space. I said I was grateful. Both can be true, thank you, and not right now. He didn't hear it as two truths. He heard it as betrayal. He said I'd changed. He said we had a bond. He said a bond without access isn't a bond at all. The guard stepped in, a hand in the air between us, a firm line drawn not on the floor but in the air, which is where all lines are drawn first. The guy's last words ricocheted off the concrete as he turned away. We made you. The door at the end of the corridor swallowed him and his echo, leaving behind a quiet that didn't feel like peace yet. Just the kind that arrives when the storm has moved on, but the trees are still deciding whether to stop shaking. In the van, the seatbelt bit my shoulder the way reality nips at you to remind you you're still here. The city outside was a smear of neon and brake lights, a pulse I've danced with and loved, and sometimes feared when it wants more than I can give. I pressed my thumb to the place the phone had tapped, not because it hurt, but because touch is how I map what a moment means. The driver asked if I was okay. I said yes, which was true for my body. The rest of me was walking the long hallway of questions I carry for nights like this. When I was younger, I believed that the more I gave, the safer I would be. That love worn like armor would stop the arrows before they arrived. That if I signed every poster, posed for every photo, stayed for every conversation until the fluorescent lights hummed alone, there would be no room left for disappointment to take root. Then my mother looked at me the way only a mother can through every year of your life at once, and asked if I knew the shape of my own breath without the world's rhythm borrowing it. She said, a warning is sometimes a wish in a coat it wears to make you take it seriously. I wish you'll keep the parts of you that can't be rebuilt if given away in small, polite pieces. I thought of the members, how we've each learned this lesson in different rooms, with different faces and different objects acting as microphones for the same hard truth. There was a night when one of us, someone whose laugh can warm a winter, came back to the hotel too quiet, like a song with the drums muted. He'd waited in the lobby with a fan who said they would just talk. And talking turned into a string of favors braided into a rope, and the rope started to pull. Another time, the one whose voice can cut a path through fog told me he stayed on a call too long because ending it felt like ending kindness. He wasn't asking for advice. We don't give each other speeches. We give each other presence and the space to put a sentence down in the middle and trust it will be there when we come back to finish it. One of us is the umbrella. He opens first when rain seems likely. On tour, he watches the weather of people, sensing storms before thunder. He taught me to read the sky above a crowd, the pitch of joy, the tilt of expectation. Another writes with silence the way some people write with ink, and when he pauses, the room remembers to breathe. He once told me, boundaries are like tempo. Without them, you only have noise, not music. There is the one who turns every hallway into choreography, and he showed me how the body can say no gracefully. The way a dancer lets a hand pass by without catching it, a refusal that still looks like care. The eldest knows the weight of a front door key. He taught me the holiness of locking up after yourself, not to keep people out, but to keep your own life inside. And the leader he carries maps in his head and compasses in his tone, and when he says we're going this way, it's never just about direction, it's about dignity, about making sure the route is one our hearts can survive. We've been held by millions of hands that never touched us. That paradox is a miracle. It is also a math problem with an impossible denominator when someone tries to divide you into a piece for everyone. I don't blame the guy in the corridor for wanting something to hold. I know what it's like to want connection so badly you mistake possession for intimacy. I know because I've done it too, in smaller ways. In quieter rooms. I've scrolled through my own life looking for a moment to anchor me and thought if I could just screenshot it, I could keep it safe. But a picture isn't safety. A picture is proof that something happened, not permission to decide what happens next. The van curved along the river. The city was a necklace of light on black water. I thought of the warning again, not as no, but as yes to something else. Yes to the show I haven't written yet because I need a mind that isn't frayed. Yes to the family dinner where rice steams like forgiveness in a bowl and laughter stitches the week back together. Yes to a phone call with someone who knows the shape of my silence and doesn't rush me to fill it. Yes to the members who take turns being the harbor when one of us arrives, weathered and needs a dock more than a destination. Yes to every stage we haven't stood on yet because we didn't spend our breath arguing with a camera in a hallway. I replayed the man's words, how he said, "We made you," and I thought about all the hands behind that sentence. The ones that held banners, the ones that clapped until palms stung, the ones that learned fan chants louder than insecurity, the ones that sent letters folded like cranes, the ones that prayed in languages I don't speak but can feel. Those hands didn't ask for ownership, they asked for honesty. Honesty is not the same as access. Honesty is not the same as always. My mother's warning wasn't a fence, it was a lantern. It doesn't say stop, it says see. When I was a trainee, there was a practice room with a mirror that got so foggy by midnight you could only make out your outline if you stood very still. I learned a trick. Step back half a pace and the blur resolves just enough to locate yourself. Boundaries are that step. Not away from people, away from distortion. If I step back half a pace from every demand that arrives dressed as devotion, I can see the person in front of me and the person inside of me at the same time. And then the yes I offer is a whole yes. Not the crumbled version that tastes like resentment on the way out. We pulled up to the building that knows the shape of my footsteps and the sound of my key. In the elevator, the fluorescent light made the night look honest. No magic, just the soft arithmetic of being alive and tired and grateful. My phone buzzed with messages, the chat from the others checking in, as they always do in our different languages of care. One sent a photo of late night noodles, an invitation to laugh with the caption. Another sent a voice note that was mostly silence and a single rest. Well, the kind of blessing that doesn't perform. Another sent a link to a song with no words, and I listened to it twice as the elevator climbed. The melody carrying the part of me still standing in that corridor back to the present. At my door, I paused and let the hallway breathe. The lock clicked, the small sound of a boundary doing its quiet job. In the kitchen, I poured water and watched it fill the glass like patience filling an hour. On the table lay a note I'd left to myself weeks ago, a scribble I'd forgotten writing. Remember, the reason you sing isn't to be seen, but to see. I think that's what the warning is for. To stop me from mistaking the gaze for the goal. To keep the work from dissolving into the performance of being reachable at all times. To keep the music from becoming a receipt in my life, from becoming a customer service counter open 24 hours. There's a bruise forming where the phone's corner kissed my bone. It's small, more memory than mark. I won't conceal it tomorrow. Not because I want the story to grow legs and run without me, but because I don't want to teach myself that the price of saying no is shame. I'm not ashamed. I'm learning a new grammar where kindness and boundary are not opposites but partners, where love that lasts is the kind that knows when to close its eyes and sleep so it can wake and give again. I'm learning the difference between being available and being present. One is a door that never closes. The other is a room that welcomes you when it opens. I hear my mother again, not as a warning this time, but as a lullaby rewritten for grown-ups. Keep a light on inside that no one else can switch. Carry a key that only you can use. Stand in the middle of your breath and count to 4 before you answer the knock. If you can do that, the knocks you open to will become conversations, not negotiations. The hellos will feel like beginnings, not withdrawals. The good nights will be endings instead of escapes. I'll see that man again. Maybe not him, but his shape, the need, the claim, the story he tells himself about what he deserves from someone he doesn't know. When I do, I'll step back half a pace and let the mirror unfog. I'll say thank you and not now. I'll remember that love is a bridge you walk together, not a lasso thrown from a crowd. I'll walk to the van with a security guard, who will pretend he didn't hear my heart speed up. Because dignity is a kindness we can offer each other, and I'll sit in the dark and listen to a song sent by a friend who knows when to say nothing. I'll text the members a row of emojis that only we could translate. And somewhere in the replies will be a joke about noodles and a promise disguised as nonsense. Here, here, here. Outside my window, the city sighs and tries on sleep. Inside, I'm setting the glass down, turning off the kitchen light, and keeping on the one my mother asked me to guard. If you were in that corridor tonight, if you have ever stood where demand tries to wear the face of devotion, if you have been told you owe yourself to whoever names you loudly enough, let me say this to you the way I'm saying it to myself. Your no is not a crime. Your yes is not a tax. Your time is not a public square. You can love fiercely without handing your keys to every knock. You can be grateful without becoming a product. You can rest without apology. There will be another show, another crowd, another group chant that threads us together like 1,000 hands knitting one scarf long enough to wrap the world. I will step onto that stage with the 6 people who have watched me learn how to carry joy without dropping myself. And we will sing the way we always do, like the lights were hung for more than spectacle, like the notes are ladders to someplace true. We'll bow, and I'll see faces that remind me why the warning is not about fear. It's about faith in what love can be when it isn't trying to own you. I'll walk off into the narrow corridor again, and maybe there will be a camera and a request, and maybe I'll be able to say yes, because rest is what makes yes honest. Or maybe I'll say not tonight, and it will be okay. Because a boundary honored is a door that opens tomorrow. And if, in the quiet after all of that, my phone buzzes with a message that simply says sleep, accompanied by a photo of noodles that no one would call photogenic, I'll smile at the tiny universe where care looks ridiculous and perfect, and I'll let the warning take off its coat and hang it by the door. It can stay. It belongs here. Not as a guard dog with bared teeth, but as a soft-eyed companion who knows when to nudge me away from a ledge I can't see yet. The bruise will fade. The lesson won't. And the light only I can switch will keep doing its humble job, bright enough to guide me back to myself, dim enough to let the city sleep. The morning didn't arrive like a clean slate. It came like a slow tide that smelled faintly of last night's neon and the paper cup of tea I fell asleep holding. I woke before the alarm, face pressed to the cool side of the pillow where the bruise had decided to bloom. In the mirror, it looked smaller than the memory, a whisper of violet tucked beneath the eye. I traced its edge with the pad of my finger, the way you read a lyric you haven't sung in public yet. I could hear the city stretching outside, buses exhaling at red lights, scooters sketching impatience into the air. The kettle complained itself awake. Steam wrote a pledge on the window and vanished before I could sign it. That felt like the way resolve behaves if you don't anchor it to anything. Here, then gone, leaving no proof you ever promised yourself you'd do better. There was a message from family, a simple sun emoji and a line that sounded like a hand on the shoulder. Eat breakfast, even if you think you can't. I poured cereal that softened into memory too fast and the second cup of tea I didn't really need, then pulled on a hoodie with a hood so generous it felt like privacy pretending to be fabric. The elevator hummed its small, unambitious song while taking me down. A neighbor nodded without asking for anything, and I stored that moment like a vitamin for later. Outside, the air had the crispness of a page not yet written on, and I tried not to draft a fight I didn't have to have today with the world or with myself. The van was waiting with the kind of patience only machines or old friends can manage. I slid in and answered the roll call that has more warmth than any formal greeting. The driver's glance in the rear view, a quiet morning. The radio tuned low to a station that plays yesterday's hits as if they were still unbroken. There's a detour I like to take along the river because the water doesn't know us. It only knows the pull of the moon and the routine of boats. The city's attention is a weather system that changes quickly. The river is a metronome that doesn't care what tempo the headlines need. I watched a gull make a decision about the surface, fold itself into an arrow, disappear, re-emerge with proof that persistence can be gentle and still be effective. Practice was scheduled in the building where the lobby smells like ambition and hand sanitizer, where the elevators are decorated with posters that stare at you with your own eyes. My footsteps clicked out a rhythm the hallway remembered from years of repetition. Before the room, there's a bench with a plant that somehow never dies, despite the lights being wrong for anything that wants to live. We've made a habit of leaving notes on the bench sometimes, just anonymous encouragements for whoever needs them next. Today, there was one already waiting. Not for anyone in particular, not even for me, but it felt right to borrow it for a second. Keep the flame steady. The song needs your breath, not your last breath. Inside, the mirrors were alert and impartial. The first person to arrive always breaks the silence like a careful diver. I stretched ankles and knees and the tender places in between. The bruise looked like punctuation when I turned my head a certain way, a comma insisting the sentence continue rather than stop. The door opened and another pair of steps entered with the soft impact of someone who knows this floor as well as his own bones. He took one look and didn't ask the wrong question. He just tilted his chin. A greeting we invented a decade ago that means here, here, here. It's a way of counting who's present without calling names. One by one, the room filled with the weather of people who'd learned to read storms before the sky darkened. There's the laugh that needs no translation and gets the air to participate. There's the quiet concentration that puts order back into a day. There's the never off duty of a leader who can gauge 3 moods and anticipate 5 directions while tying their shoes. No one poked at the bruise. No one put it on a pedestal. Instead, someone set a bottle of water beside me without ceremony. Someone else shot me a look that said, "We'll joke later," and another adjusted the speakers so the first bass line could find the floor without rattling our ribs. We ran the routine that has been rebuilding my legs since before the sun decided to respect the skyline, and the room changed shape the way it always does when the second chorus arrives. And our bodies remember which corner belongs to which count. There's a clarity that comes when every limb has a job. It's the opposite of the corridor. In here, demand is replaced by design. Access is replaced by trust. You know where to be, not because someone drags you there, but because the music invites you and the others make room. Midway through a sequence, my foot landed half a beat, early thoughts, sprinting ahead, clumsy, and I caught myself, reset, and apologized with a glance. A hand tapped the beat in the air, generous, and I fell back into the pocket like a marble, finding its groove in an old game that never stops being new. We paused only when Oxygen sent a petition signed by our lungs, and I noticed a text blinking at me from a contact. I would never label anything but the first word I said in this life. The warning had traveled from her mouth to my chest last night, but this time it arrived written like a recipe. 1 cup of yes, 2 cups of no, stir until your peace rises. I think sometimes she disguises courage as a cooking instruction, so I won't argue with it. The message didn't ask for details. It didn't make fear a headline. It simply asked if I was holding myself gently and if the day required me to do anything I wasn't fit to offer. I said I was fine. Then I corrected myself and said I was learning, which is not the same thing, but feels more honest. We started again. There's a moment in the choreography where all 7 lines intersect, not with bodies, but with intent. And if you breathe right, you can feel the room become wider than its walls. That's the place I return to when the world insists that my value is the sum of my appearances. In that crossing, you can't be a product because there's no transaction, only exchange. Your energy doesn't get taken. It gets answered. The mirrors, for all their insistence on reflection, don't record that part. The glass goes quiet. The skin learns the lesson instead. I held to it as if it were a handrail on a staircase in a building where the lights sometimes flicker. After, we sat around on the floor in a semicircle that looked like a broken halo. Someone distributed snacks as if we were on a field trip and not grown men with careers old enough to vote. The talk turned to the news in our small universe. a relative's health improving, a demo that sounded like summer remembered in November, a dream about missing the stage entrance and discovering a secret stairwell that led to a stage in a different country. In the middle of that, someone brought up the silence that can happen in a crowd, how a stadium can feel like a library for 1 second right before a wave hits, how that hush is where all the love is stored before it rushes out. We passed that idea around, turning it over like a stone smoothed by a river. Someone said that hush is what boundaries sound like when they're respected, not absence, but attention. The door nudged open and a staff member slipped in with a voice low enough not to disturb whatever the air had decided to do. There was a reminder about a small shoot later, something informal, and a mention brief, careful of chatter online. The corridor was already a rumor wearing my name like a borrowed jacket. It fit poorly and moved too fast. Someone had posted an edited angle with captions that turned a refusal into arrogance and a jostle into cruelty. The room didn't crack, it just tightened its circle. The leader's eyes did the math and came up with kindness as the only sustainable answer. We would say what we needed to say without feeding the machine that eats nuance for breakfast. When you've been in this for a while, you learn to separate the storm from the weather report. A storm is something you strap down and take shelter from. A weather report is a voice speaking in your kitchen while you butter toast. You can lower the volume without the sky punishing you. We decided to lower the volume. We practiced again, not as an avoidance, but as a prayer that uses muscle instead of incense. By afternoon, the bruise had settled into a color that reminded me of the underside of twilight. I pulled a cap low and slipped out with one of the others toward the studio where the microphones are patient and the engineers speak a language that sits somewhere between science and myth. On the way, we passed a cluster of people outside the building, hands already arranged in the shape that holds a phone. I could feel the air reach for me, not as a danger, but as a habit. Before it became anything, a staff member slid forward like punctuation and helped draw a sentence that ended without a fight. A voice from the group called out my name, shaped like a request. I turned and pressed my palms together, a small bow that carries the weight of a promise. I see you, even if I can't be with you right now. Disappointment hung for a second, then, mercifully, turned into understanding. Cameras dropped. A laugh escaped from someone light, not bitter. The moment walked away from what it could have become. The studio keeps a colder temperature than the outside world, as if songs form better when your skin remembers to contract and your breath fogs in little clouds that disappear before they cause trouble. I layered harmonies like stacking chairs after an event and tried to keep my mind from replaying the corridor. Still, when the engineer pressed talkback and said, friendly, "How are you holding up?" the question pierced something I hadn't armored. I told the truth in a tone that let him set his coffee down without throwing it away. I said I was cycling between gratitude and a tiredness that didn't answer to sleep. He nodded, the way you nod when someone says the name of a city you've lived in long enough to miss when you leave it. There is a booth you can stand in that takes a voice and sends it into a room where it becomes tall enough to touch the ceiling. In there, I recorded a line that felt like sweeping glass off a floor. I will not confuse love with access anymore. The melody wrapped the sentence in something soft enough that it didn't cut on the way out. I sang it twice, then a third time, with the vowel placed closer to where breath starts. The others came in, one after the other, like lanterns crossing a dark field. We made a harmony that didn't need words to agree. For a minute, the day stopped making demands and started making sense. Evening isn't a time so much as a change in the quality of light. We left under a sky that looked like it had been edited to appear braver than it was. I checked my phone and found the conversation with home waiting, not with insistence, but with patience that feels like the kind of love you can live in. The warning had another chapter. Beware of the bargains you never agreed to. Beware of the small debts someone tries to turn into a mortgage on your life. Beware of the stories that make you the villain just so someone else can feel like the hero in a narrative that needed a lesson more than it needed a truth. I read it while leaning against the cool lip of a windowsill. Traffic strings stitched the city to itself. Somewhere, a song we haven't released yet was leaking under a practice room door in a building 3 blocks away, and the night forgave the trespass because it recognized devotion when it heard it. At a late dinner that qualified as breakfast for tomorrow, we found a small restaurant that serves broth like it knows secrets you haven't earned yet. We sat in the corner that doesn't advertise itself as private but behaves that way if you treat it gently. Chopsticks, tap bowls, broth steadied hands. We didn't draft statements, we traded weather. Someone told a story about a fan who cried because they had finally said no to someone and how that no had tasted like metal for a second and then like clean water. Someone else admitted to giving away too many yeses last year, to losing whole afternoons to guilt that never paid rent. We laughed where the honesty needed a cushion. We went quiet where the honesty needed a room. I caught my reflection in the window and saw the hint of twilight under my eye and thought of all the marks the job leaves that never show. The micro surrenders, the tiny defiance, the practice kindness that has to be practiced, because it's not kindness if it empties you out. I remembered a stage somewhere far away where we stood, and a hush fell that made the air feel like a hand placed on a racing heart. That hush is what I want to carry more than any shout. That hush is what I want to offer when someone reaches for me like I'm a vending machine that owes them a prize they didn't pay for. On the ride home, messages came in like fireflies that remembered the route back to a field we used to play in. A joke arrived that bent the day in half so it could fit in a pocket. A short clip of a puppy made everyone type the same vowel in different length. A photo of a half-eaten dessert appeared with a caption that pretended it was an apology and wasn't. I added a picture of the city from my window, a mess of light that refuses to apologize for being too much. The reply said, what only we could hear between the lines. Steady, steady, steady. When I reached my door, I listened for the sound the lock makes when it's sure of itself. Inside, shoes made the small confession they always make when they surrender the day. The bruise had decided on its final shade for the night, a lesson written in ink that will fade but not forget. I washed my face and watched the water argue with the mirror until both reached a truce. In the quiet, I rehearsed the sentence I know I'll need again, not just for strangers, but for every version of me that believes I'm only as worthy as the last time I didn't disappoint anyone. Thank you, and not right now. I will keep learning to say it in a way that leaves both the world and myself with dignity still in our hands. There are doors I haven't opened yet because I was too busy being an open door for everyone else. There are songs I haven't finished because I kept lending the middle of my thought to the loudest knock. There are mornings I haven't met because I stayed up defending a kindness I never actually withdrew. Tonight, I am choosing one door and one song in one morning, and I am setting them on the table like fruit my mother cuts with that patient knife that turns the ordinary into a ceremony. The warning she gave is not a verdict. It's a vow I can make with myself and keep without anyone's applause. Guard the flame. Feed it with yes, protect it with no, and sing only when the melody can carry both without breaking. Outside, somewhere, the river is pretending not to care about the moon while obeying it perfectly. Inside, I am letting sleep court me without needing to impress it. If the day asks what I learned, I'll say this. Love that lasts does not demand a 24-hour storefront. It knocks during business hours, accepts that lights go off, and returns when the door opens again. It understands that the hush before the roar is where the truth sits, waiting, unafraid of being ignored, because it knows someone will listen with the kind of attention that doesn't need a camera to qualify as real. Tomorrow will build its own corridor. I will walk it at a pace that belongs to me, and if a lens rises like a sunrise I didn't request, I will offer the bow that says I see you and the boundary that says I see me, and I will trust that the bridge love offers is strong enough to carry both of us without turning either of us into a trophy. Morning arrived like a careful hand smoothing the creases from a shirt I wasn't sure I wanted to wear. I woke with the city half asleep at the window and the bruise under my eye deciding on a quieter color, like twilight learning manner. In the first breath after waking, there's a small vote you cast about who you're gonna be. And for a second, I almost chose the boy who apologizes to the air just for existing in it. I let that vote pass without counting it. The kettle began its ritual. Steam sketched a cloud on the glass and signed it with a vanishing signature. I put the phone face down because some mornings are a house and notifications try to let themselves in without knocking. The silence stayed. It wasn't empty. It was listening. I told myself I would walk a different route to the building today. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to introduce my feet to a street that didn't know my name. There's a bakery that opens too early for reasonable people, and the smell of bread in the cold is a sermon nobody minds hearing twice. I stood outside for a moment and let the warmth argue with the wind. I bought nothing. I took everything. A delivery truck sighed. A bicyclist drew a straight line through the space between two worries I hadn't decided what to do with. That line became my plan. Move, even if I don't fully know where, as long as I know how. The van greeted me with that loyal machine patience, and the driver nodded in the rear view. A check-in without the weight of a questionnaire. We took the river road. The water was pretending not to be cold, holding a flat face against the air that gave away nothing. It's a kind of strength I admire and don't want to imitate. I want to be the kind of strong that admits the wind is a skilled negotiator and still chooses warmth where I can find it. Under a bridge, 3 joggers match cadence without speaking. I watched them and thought of the way our feet find each other on stage, even in the dark, a choreography that remembers us even when we forget ourselves for a beat. At the building, the lobby plant we don't know how to keep alive greeted me with another day of surviving its poor odds. That plant is stubborn hope in a pot, and I took the hint. On the bench, there was no new note this time, so I left one. It said, "Guard the flame, the song needs your breath, not your last breath." It's funny how repetition can be rescued if you let it. I wrote it again underneath in smaller handwriting, because sometimes you need the same sentence in 2 sizes to reach different parts of yourself. Inside the practice room, the mirrors waited without opinion. The floor remembered my weight like a friend who doesn't make that memory into leverage. I stretched in a quiet that didn't require an explanation. Then the door opened and the weather changed. A laugh entered first. There's always that one laugh that cures the artificial edges from a morning, and it was followed by footsteps I could recognize 3 buildings away. We greeted each other in the language we learned before we knew it was a language. A combination of chin tilts and shoulder taps, and the particular way a bottle of water lands near your foot when someone is thinking of you. The bruise did not become the topic. It became a comma. A reminder that sentences can continue, even with small marks in the middle. We ran the first sequence like we were reminding the floor of who we are when we are doing what we are meant to do. The leader counted us in with his voice in that precise tone that cuts a path through any fog, and the eldest made a joke under his breath that was less about humor and more about oiling the gears. The dancer who turns hallways into choreography flipped his wrist once. A private semaphore that says, "Ease back into your body." It remembers how to hold you. The quiet one placed his attention in the room like a candle you don't dare blow out. And the laughter bear found a harmony to hum that nobody asked for but everyone needed. We moved. The mirror stayed loyal to physics, but the space between us started behaving like grace. At break, I pulled my hoodie into a shadow and slipped to a corner where the air felt unbooked. The phone lit with a call I will always answer. My mother's voice arrived without luggage, settling into the room as if it had always lived there. We spoke about boring things first, the way you circle a lake to find the right place to enter. She asked if I'd eaten, which is really a way of asking if I still believe in my own survival. I said yes and named a food that sounds like comfort when you pronounce it correctly. She didn't ask about the video or the comments, didn't try to hold the internet in a palm, neither of us has. She asked if I remembered the Busan market on winter mornings when the vendor's breath looked like soft smoke and the world smelled like fish and seawater and fresh dough. I said I did. She said, "Do you remember how we walked close enough to choose the same direction without pulling on each other's sleeves? That's what a boundary is," she said. You don't love me less because you don't drag me. We paused together long enough to understand she wasn't only talking about us. I told her the warning had grown taller overnight. She told me warnings aren't guards. They're guides that lay down breadcrumbs so you can find your way back when a crowd insists the shortest path is through yourself. I thought of the corridor and how the word you owe tried to wear a friendly shirt while picking my pocket. I told her I don't want to grow a shell. She said a shell is for hiding. You need a door. A door opens and closes. It isn't a reaction. It's a choice. Hang a bell if you must. You'll hear when what's knocking is love and when it's hunger dressed as love. When I returned to the room, the music was a familiar tide, and I waded in. We adjusted small things, where a hand cuts the air, where the breath rests on the offbeat, where I've been adding too much pressure on a turn because my head's been running a marathon no one asked me to run. The one whose voice can make a room larger by simply opening his mouth, saying a line out of nowhere, and we folded it into our bodies as if it had always belonged. That's the part people don't see. How often the best things begin as accidents that refuse to apologize for being right. A schedule reminder slid under the door of our attention. A short filming later, a small Q&A for a cause we believe in, the kind that doesn't use charity as a mirror, but as a door that opens somewhere useful. The staff spoke in the gentle register you adopt when you're trying to guide the day without making it feel owned. We nodded, and I tucked the plan into the same pocket as my mother's voice. The Q&A room was small. The lights not unforgiving, but certainly truthful. Before we entered, we did the quick ritual we invented to make sure we're entering as ourselves, not as accusations trying to outrun their verdict. A hand squeeze passed from one to the next, the kind of circuit that hums rather than shocks. A volunteer explained how the questions would work, how some would be from the audience, how there would be a moment for a surprise they had organized. I have learned that the word surprise in public means be ready to draw a line for the sake of the surprise giver, not against them. We Saturday questions arrived like sparrows, light enough to land, quick enough to leave. We answered with the kind of laughter and honesty that doesn't ask for applause. Then a hand went up near the back. A phone held at the ready as if it were a passport to another country called proof. The question began respectfully, almost sweet, the kind that begins with praise and then unfolds a request to enter a room in you where guests don't belong. Could we record a private message using a personal name? Could we say specific words that would fix a fight? Could we promise a visit? Could we validate a decision someone had made that left them stranded? The room tilted. The volunteer turned to us for permission they shouldn't have had to ask. I steadied my voice where it lives behind my ribs and said what I'm learning to say as if I invented the language. We love you, and no, not that way. We'll keep loving you this way. There was a murmur, the sound the crowd makes when it has to respect the door. The person who asked looked disappointed in a way that wasn't unkind, just human. I offered a bow that knows the difference between rejection and refusal. The room righted itself, and the next question arrived about music and sleep schedules and the funny problem of forgetting where you are when you wake on tour. We answered that one with a pile of nonsense that made sense only because we built it together. The surprise ended up being a collage of soft moments cut from people's days, someone cooking breakfast for someone else, someone walking a small dog in a ridiculous sweater, someone planting a plant that had no chance in the light it was given but would probably live anyway. I felt the boundary shift from fence to bridge, and I walked across it with the careful step of a person who's remembered the choreography after a blackout. After, in the hallway, a staff member read a message off a phone about a clip spreading fast, an angle from the corridor 2 nights ago, trimmed to look like a confession of arrogance. The words were familiar ghosts. The leader took the phone, measured the temperature, turned the screen off, and handed it back with a nod that said, "We will answer this by living, not by litigating." It's not indifference, it's discipline. There is a difference, and the difference is dignity. We found the studio after the one with the patient microphones and the engineers who speak in precise sentences like carpenters measuring twice before they cut. The quiet one laid a piano line like a path through a small forest. I stood in the booth and thought about Busan mornings, about my mother's hand near mine, about the warning as a bell on a door only I can open. The lyric arrived not as a solution but as a statement of stewardship. I will not spend my life to rent your approval. I placed it on the melody and listened to how it sat. Not stiff, not angry, just resolve. The dancer traced a shape in the air that matched the rhythm the sentence made against my throat. The laughter bearer added a harmony so gentle it could have passed for a thought. The eldest adjusted a word the way you adjust a frame around a picture, so it hangs level. The leader checked the arc we were drawing and nodded once. The kind of yes, that means keep going exactly like that. Night doesn't fall, it sifts. And by the time it's done, the city is a bowl of dark with small lights floating like dumplings. We left this studio together and stood on the sidewalk, while our rides lined up like polite punctuation. A small group had found the spot, someone had scattered a rumor like seeds, and of course something grew. They kept a distance that told me the warning had been carried to them too by some kindness in the chain. Phones rose, but not in a way that weaponized the air. A voice called my name like a greeting without a hook hidden inside it. I turned and put my palms together in front of my chest, a bow that is both hello and thank you. Someone in the small group said softly, rest. I felt the word land. We got in the vans without drama, which is another kind of victory that doesn't need headlines. On the ride, the thread started. A message from one of us about noodles again. A blurry photo of a cat who refuses to identify as a cat. A voice note with melody fragments hummed through a smile, and one text that said only steady. It's the word we've adopted for nights that want to rewrite their own script in heavy font. I sent a photo of the river, a long shutter streak that made every light look like it had somewhere else to be. Replies stacked like choir risers. We didn't solve anything. We didn't have to. We just kept the flame fed with small oxygen. Home is a door that knows your hand if you're lucky, and the lock performed its little magic with no audience. I left the day on the threshold the way you leave shoes. Not thrown, not displayed, just put down with intention. In the kitchen, water cooled enough to drink without hurrying. The bruise settled into the same shade as a promise you've decided to keep quietly. I stood at the window and watched a couple cross the street, arguing with tenderness, each trying to carry more than their share of whatever bag they were holding. I heard my mother's voice again, this time as a memory I could set on the table without breaking it. Boundary, boundary, boundary. Not as a jail, as a garden fence with a gate, so you can welcome what feeds you and keep out what tramples what you're growing. I wrote the lyric from the studio on a scrap of paper and taped it to the wall where my eye lands when I come home tired. I will not spend my life to rent your approval. I wrote another beneath it, because I'm greedy for reminders. Honesty is not access, gratitude is not a leash. I wrote a third smaller, almost like a secret. I will not let a bruise be the author of my day. Then I rinsed the bowl, wiped the counter, set an alarm for a time that suggests optimism. The quiet inside the apartment changed weight, like a cat settling in a warm lap. I remember the Busan market and the way two people can walk together without pulling, the way you can read the tilt in someone's shoulder and know which stall they're drifting toward. I want to be that kind of reader of the world, to move with it without being dragged by it, to recognize the difference between a hand reaching for mine and a hand reaching past it to the pocket where I keep my breath. Before bed, I scrolled briefly, not to punish myself, just to check the temperature. The clip was still busy performing its one scene play, but further down there was a video of a small dog in a sweater taking stairs with dramatic caution, and its human laughing softly, not at it but with it, and the caption said, "We're learning our pace." And that felt like a message addressed to me. I put the phone face down again. The room agreed to keep its secrets. I turned off every light but one, the one I promised to keep, and I lay down with the sentence my mother gave me tied around my wrist like a red thread that knows where home is. A door, not a shell. A bell, not an alarm. A garden, not a fortress. Sleep arrived from the good direction, the way a friend approaches from the front and not the side. I told it what I tell every stage before we step on it. I'm here, here, here. And somewhere in the layers between awake and gone, I found the corridor again. But this time it was wider. The phone in that memory was just a rectangular star with no pull. The word you owe lost its vowels and fell apart. The guard nodded and walked away because I didn't need him anymore for that hallway. I turned toward the door with the bell. My mother told me to hang and heard it ring once. A bright, ordinary sound you could build a life around. The day opened like a stage curtain drawn back by a careful hand, and I found myself already standing in the first pool of light. Not because I wanted applause, but because the schedule had decided my mark for me. The bruise had faded into something the color of an old idea. The kind you keep not because it's useful, but because it taught you a lesson on its way out. I ran a fingertip along the ghost of it and felt nothing, which is not to say it meant nothing. Some things teach by disappearing. Outside, the morning folded itself into a colder coat and the city pretended to be indifferent while escorting everyone where they thought they had to go. I packed what I needed and what I always forget. I'll need quiet water. The sentence I've been practicing. Thank you, and not right now, and headed for the van. The river was shy today, wearing a gray surface that refused to confess what lived beneath it. A fisherman stood like punctuation at the edge, patient in a way that dared the wind to call him foolish. I wanted that kind of patience, not as a performance, but as muscle memory. We had a venue walkthrough, the kind where the arena shows its bones and the seats stare empty, in the kind of silence that tells the truth without trying to soothe. The building rose out of the neighborhood like it had always been there in people's dreams and only recently agreed to be visible. Inside, cables slept in coils the way serpents do in myths, and trusses arched across the ceiling like a cathedral built for sound instead of prayer. Maybe there's no difference if you do it right. Sound check is a ceremony disguised as troubleshooting. You test the gear so your heart doesn't have to overcompensate later. The engineers set their instruments on a table like surgeons preparing to remake silence into something generous. The leader moved through the space with that mapmaker gaze he carries, measuring distances the rest of us feel, but don't name. The eldest greeted staff with the respect of a man who knows a show stands on 1,000 unglamorous decisions, and some of them get made in rooms no camera will ever visit. The dancer drifted across the apron of the stage, sketching possibilities with wrists and ankles, negotiating with gravity as if it were an old friend who occasionally needs to be reminded of boundaries. The quiet one sat at a keyboard and placed 2 notes in the air the way you hang a painting and step back to see if the wall appreciates your choice. The laugh was late on purpose, like a punchline that knows it's only funny if people have time to breathe first. When it arrived, it ironed the anxiety out of the room as efficiently as steam on fabric. I took the mic and let the sound climb up my throat and out. Not to show off range, but to check whether the truth could travel. There's always that moment where you hear yourself through the system and your voice comes back carrying stories you didn't teach it to carry. A market in winter where breath looks like incense, the corridor with the phone, the van that takes the river road, the patient bell on the inside of a door only you can open. The in-ears hum their small private weather. I sang a line not on any set list, one that arrived 2 nights ago like a guest who didn't bother knocking. I will not spend my life to rent your approval. The speakers returned it to me larger and less lonely. The engineer looked up, not to compliment, but to acknowledge that the sentence had found a frequency home. We moved from sound to light. The rig blinked awakened palates. Someone had chosen to feel like breath, not glare. I walked the stage in slow lines, stopping where future feet would pause to tell stories through muscle and timing. The leader called out sight lines and the crew shifted angles without complaint. There's a choreography in that too. A dance that looks like heavy lifting, because it is. The laughter bearer vaulted onto a riser and tried out an improvised line about noodles that made a grip laugh out loud and almost drop a wrench. And for a second, Destiny took a coffee break and the room belonged to something simpler than purpose. After the formalities, we scattered across the building like sparrows that still know how to reconvene at the first hint of seat. I walked the vomitory that delivers you into the audience and stood at the threshold like a pilgrim who discovered the temple is a circle. Sometimes I think about the hush the crowd holds in the second before the first beat hits. How that silence contains every reason anyone ever left their house and came to stand next to strangers on purpose. That hush is my favorite kind of attention, because it doesn't feel like ownership, it feels like shared breath. A staff member cleared their throat with gentle efficiency and told us a small group was waiting at a designated corner, early arrivals who had found the kind of entrance the internet trades like a treasure map. We've learned to treat moments like that as opportunities to practice the love we claim without practicing the access we cannot give. We went out together, not as a procession, but as ourselves. The group saw us and remembered courtesy. Phones did rise, because that's what hands do now. But not every lens turns into a demand. A voice floated from the back, not loud, just sincere, asking for a hello and wishing health, like a blessing people used to exchange at gates. I bowed and added the pressed palms that mean more to me than 1,000 signatures. Someone asked if tonight would include an old song that still makes the bones of teenagers rattle in the best way. And the leader smiled in that way that says, "We remember too." Our request tried to dress itself as a gift. Could we record something personal that would settle a fight? And I felt the old corridor trying to rebuild itself around us. The bell inside my door rang once, bright and ordinary. I thanked them, I honored the care, and I said no in a tone that loved the person and refused the bargain. The disappointment did not turn into an argument. It turned into respect. That's how you know you weren't just talking to a demand, you were talking to a human being who wanted to be seen as much as they wanted to see. Back inside, the catering line smelled like a compromise between vegetables and comfort food, which is really just vegetables telling the truth in a sauce people can accept. I ate without apology and texted a photo to the group chat that suggested the steamed buns had been blessed by a minor deity. Replies stacked like harmonies. One message contained a blurry hallway selfie that made me snort tea through my nose. Another was a voice note in which a melody wandered around a thesis until it found one worth staying with. Someone sent a picture of the plant in the lobby with a caption that read, "Still alive, against all odds, like us." The laugh replied last, as always, with an emoji sequence that only we could parse. And across the top of it, the leader wrote one word that keeps finding us when we need it: steady. A meeting with the safety team followed, the kind where people who like details more than drama walk us through exits and contingencies we pray never introduce themselves by name. Maps unfolded, radios chirped their little metallic bird song. I signed the paper that says I heard and understood. But what I really understood was that care is work and love is logistics as often as it is poetry. When I left the room, I bumped into the quiet one carrying a thermos. He handed it over without eye contact, in that particular kindness that refuses to make debt. "For the voice," he said, and moved on. I poured a cup and felt the heat do its slow, kind arithmetic. The bruise under my eye had become the color of rest. I touched it and thought of all the places people bruise where cameras never see. In a rehearsal room tucked under the seating like a hidden lung, we ran a stripped version of a bridge that has been misbehaving, the kind that either lifts an audience into one body or drops them into individual phones. We tried it clean, then dirty, then as a whisper. The dancers suggested a turn that spent less and said more. The eldest cut a bar that had grown self-conscious. The laughter carved a path around a note he knew I'd been forcing. The leader listened with the patience of a well-built chair and said, again, not as punishment, but as invitation. We found it on the fourth pass, which is where most good things live. After the impatience leaves, before perfection starts lying to you, afternoon slid across the building and evening began to rehearse its entrance. I stepped into a corridor alone to remind myself I could. The concrete floor offered no opinions. The fluorescence told the truth without flattery. Halfway down, a door opened and a staffer stepped out, surprising themselves at the same time they surprised me. We both did that small dance people do when deciding who yields. And I yielded on purpose because control that doesn't harden into pride is a luxury I plan to keep. They asked if everything was okay in the voice of someone who has watched too many small storms gather into one you cannot outrun. I said it was better than okay, which is what it feels like when you notice your shoulders have stopped trying to hold up the ceiling. A message from home chimed at a volume no one else could hear. A picture arrived of a kitchen I know by smell alone and a cutting board where fruit had been arranged like a pattern only love would bother to learn. The accompanying line read, "Remember how we walk in markets." That's all it said. I replied with a photo of the empty seats waiting to become a choir and typed, "I'm remembering." The ... appeared like a heartbeat, then stopped. Not because there was nothing to say, but because enough had been said. The warning has become a blessing in installments. It arrives not to generate fear, but to sponsor freedom. As we collected ourselves for a short live stream, the kind that tries to put a window where a wall would be, I reviewed the sentiments of the day to make sure none of them would get stirred up into murk while I was busy saying hello to a million people at once. We sat close and let the chat scroll past like a river full of confetti, certain phrases bobbing up with the persistence of hopeful fish. Stay healthy, rest well, we're proud. Are you eating? Please sing this. Do you remember that I was at this show? Today was hard for me. Today was beautiful for me. Thank you for making a place where both can sit. I read the ones that asked for my breath like it was theirs, and I honored the ache behind it without giving away the lungs that keep my voice alive. The leader closed the stream the way he always does, with a tone that feels like a hand smoothing the air down so everyone can sleep. We waved, the screen went dark, and in the sudden quiet, I felt the gratitude that doesn't demand anything back. The best kind, night dress. The arena began to inhale its first guest. The hush returned, thicker now, eager to be broken by design. We huddled without ceremony, a knot of people who know the worth of each other's minutes. No speeches, just that pulse we passed from palm to palm. A staffer announced idle facts over comms, and they sounded like psalms to me. Doors are open,